This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
Welcome, everyone, to Black Market Leadership. This is Kevin Black. We have I am extraordinarily excited. Someone who I have been following for years, who I find is inspirational and who's just really cool. My guest is the Carol Roth. Hello, Carol.
Hi, Kevin. That's a very nice introduction. I hope I can live up to the coolness on the podcast.
Oh, Carol, I have no doubt. So for the audience, I have a little bit of your bio here.
Oh,
Carol,
okay.
Carol Roth is an American TV personality, New York Times bestselling author, entrepreneur, radio host, and investor. She regularly appears on national cable television networks such as Fox Business, CNBC, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. She was also one of the judges on Mark Burnett's America's Greatest Makers television show and a weekly panelist on current events on the Bulls and Bears show on Fox Business. She was the host of WGN's radio's The Noon Show and author. And guys, you got to get this. Go to Amazon, The Entrepreneur Equation. After, of course, you get The War on Small Business. You got to pick that up as well. And she's a host of her own podcast, The Roth Effect, which I highly recommend. You've had some really, really cool guests, Carol. And finally, because you have such a great bio, I got to say this. She is a self-styled recovering investment banker, in which she completed more than $2 billion in capital raising, mergers and acquisitions. And most of all, she has her own action figure.
You can see right behind me if you're watching the video version of that. So.
There we go. Yeah, pretty cool, Carol. Well, thank you so much for being on Black Market Leadership.
My pleasure. All right, what you got for me, Kevin?
Okay, so one of the things that I love talking about, and one of the things that we focus on are disruptors. And boy, talk about disruption. I have your book here, and for the audience, The War on Small Business. And I tell you right now, people, you got to pick it up. So I want to read on the back here. You have praise for the War on Small Business, and I want to read Neil Cavuto's because I think.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, it is pretty good. Okay, so quote, "It's no secret that the pandemic has left a lasting and devastating impact on small businesses across America. Leave it to Carol Roth to say lots of those businesses didn't die. They were murdered by a deliberate and targeted war on their independence and very livelihoods. She lays bare the concerted carving up of our capitalist ideals and free market, meticulously planned and ruthlessly delivered. Be warned, this book is not for the faint of heart, but it is a must read for those who still have a heart." What a testimonial.
Yeah, Neil's got away with words. You've read the book. Do you feel like that was an accurate testimonial?
Yeah. So first thoughts. I read it, and first of all, kudos to you, because at the end you mentioned this was a Herculean effort. The editing on this is amazing. It really is. And I think, was it 270 pages? It is an easy read. It is not overcomplicated. It's to the point. And I want to tell you, reading this, I got mad because I think myself and a lot of people out there recognize that, politicians are kind of slimy. Shake their hands. You got to wash your hands afterward. Reading this, I never realized just how bad it was. And if you were a prosecutor, you have a strong case, a strong evidentiary case of what the U.S. government, as you say, the central planners, what they've done to small businesses. So my question to you is, what inspired you to pick this fight?
Well, since you've been following me for a while, you might know that I've been a longtime advocate for small business, a group that does not get nearly enough advocacy. And as you mentioned, I wrote a book previously about 10 years ago about all of the difficulties of running your own business and all of the risks. And never did I think that the number one risk to a small business in the United States of America was going to be the US government coming in, shutting them down, not compensating them for doing so appropriately, and letting their big competitors at the same time stay open. Like, that was like, what? Like, how's that going to happen? So, that was, that's always been sort of my philosophy, is I'm going to stand up for the little guy. But when HarperCollins approached me to do an economic deep dive on this historic scenario, and I just wrote kind of as I saw things happening, and obviously stuff got uncovered, months after it happened, and it to keep kind of going back and keeping track of this crazy timeline, this crazy set of actions and outcomes. It was clear that this government picking of winners and losers, not based on data or science, but based on political clout and connection, was a huge story, as was what it enabled, which was a historic transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. And so I knew that that was going to be a big story. And frankly, I thought I was going to have to compete with a whole ton of other people to be the first to tell the story. And unfortunately, not only by the first person, but there's a whole bunch of media who doesn't want to cover this story. So that's been a giant surprise for me, for my publisher, that, we thought we were getting beat to the market, and it's been sort of the opposite. They're trying to sweep the story under the rug. So I'm thrilled historically to have this living document that will not let people be gaslit, that will tell you exactly in no uncertain terms what happened, because the story is going to be, well, the economy's fine, the economy's recovered, it's great. And sure, if you're the 7 tech companies that gained $3.4 trillion in value on a headline basis, that looks great. The stock market increased, that looks great. When you get into the underpinnings and how much of that went from this decentralized portion of the economy to the central portion of the economy, how it took away economic freedom and wealth creation opportunities for millions of Americans, you start to understand what's going on, and it's actually really frightening.
What's the response been?
So it's been, if I can get you to read the book, the response has been overwhelmingly positive across the political spectrum, by the way. This is a political economic book, but it's not a partisan book. It's not about politics per se. It's just that's the underpinning of a lot of what happened. So I have people who are very far on one side and very far on the other, who all say, wow, this is great. It was so well researched. You really didn't call names. You didn't really pick favorites here. Nobody escaped unscathed. And, I learned so much. So if I can get you to read the book, the feedback's been amazing. The problem, the roadblock that I've encountered, as I sort of alluded to, is that a lot of the mainstream media does not want to cover this, which is insane, because it's important and they want to rewrite what happened in history. So I've, at this point in time, done exactly 0 primetime shows and 0 morning shows, which, to a listener may not sound like a big deal, but you have to understand, I've been in the media for 12 years and I'm on TV like 2 to 5 times a week, and have been for like 12 years. And I've been on these shows, and I know these people, and people who, I've gone on to talk about nonsense on their shows before aren't supporting this book. Now, there are a lot of people in the decentralized media who have been great supporters and have given us a platform. And so that's the route that I've taken, much like a small business, right? You go to these kind of smaller outlets and you do it more frequently, and you try to spread the word that way. But in terms of getting a lot of the big megaphones, there have only been a couple of those opportunities afforded. And when those are afforded, they do very well. I just had a piece in the New York Post, basically saying COVID didn't kill small businesses, the government did. And that got huge traction. I mean, my second retweet of it got 3,000 likes on Twitter, and all kinds of people commenting. And that wasn't even the first one. That was the follow-up one. So we know there's an interest from people, from the average Americans who want to hear about this and who want to learn, but the people who control the platforms don't want you to know about it, which unintentionally proves the thesis that I'm trying to set forth anyway. So
that's such a great point. I was really wondering, so when I was reading this and I picked it up, knowing your background, I was like, man, there's going to be a lot of economics in this. I mean, obviously COVID, the CARES Act. And I read this and originally when I picked the book, I'm like, okay, this is going to be for entrepreneurs and small business owners. But the more I read it, I was thinking, this is for Americans.
Yeah.
Because you've done something with this, and I'm going to give you praise here by making this correlation. But, we just got through the 4th of July. And one of the things that my family does is we watch the episode of John Adams, HBO John Adams, where they read the Declaration of Independence. And, everyone knows that, the preamble about all men created equal. Well, a lot of people who have not read the Declaration don't realize like 5/6 of that document are the evidentiary points of how the king screwed us over. So reading your book, you've done something which I think is fascinating. It's not just a case based on evidence, but you do something that so many people do not do. You tie capitalism, not just to economics, but to personal liberty. The attacks on small businesses are attacks on our liberty. So I found that fascinating. And my question to you is, most people who I've talked to about capitalism don't make that connection. Where did you learn to make these connections? Was this through your reading, your experiences? How did you do this?
I mean, Lord, that's a great question. I've been studying markets, and so kind of de facto studying capitalism like my entire life. I've been fascinated by the concept of markets and freedom and entrepreneurship and those kinds of things. But I was never political. I got dragged into this kind of political sphere unintentionally. And I was telling her, like, I just wanted to be a game show host. Like, all of this just, came out. I still want to be a game show host. This is all just like, so I don't know how we ended up over here, but that's what happened. But I just feel like as I continued my studies, and even though I'm like an economics major from Wharton and a former investment banker, a recovering investment banker, I don't learn sort of the same way that other people do. And when they start talking about like, are you supply side or are you Keynesian? Like, I don't know. Like, those are all like very theoretical. I like to take things that are real and try to explain it. And I feel like that's always been a gift of being able to break things down and kind of explain them in these sort of Sesame Street kind of bites. So I feel like, just as I've uncovered and you've been in the media talking about things and learned more about the structure of our country, how it was built, what capitalism is, and just kind of, it's just been an ongoing formulation that I've kind of put it together in that way. And that's why I try to explain to people, because I feel like people get caught up in the semantics, like what's capitalism, what's social, and whatever. And that's why I tried to, when I created that spectrum that I put in the book, in the back half of the book, that I just try to explain, like, capitalism is just like freedom, choice, transparency, with the guardrails of the protection of individual rights, including property rights. Like that's all it is. It's just us having free choice versus central planning, which is the handful of people making decisions and using force and coercion and control. I feel like that's just a better way, because it doesn't matter what the label is and it doesn't matter the flavor of it, but it's like, do you want us to individually make these choices and have the freedom and, reap the rewards and consequences, or do you like trust like a handful of goofballs to make these decisions and really think that that's going to somehow benefit you and everybody else? And so I feel like breaking it down and kind of stripping away all of the like weird, wonky academic stuff, conceptually, hopefully gives people a different framework, because that's just how I think about it.
I tell you, this is why I'm a big fan of yours, because I think you are the ideal person to write and present this book, because you said it. You have you're a recovering investment banker. You've seen the other side, but when you talk, you're down to earth. You're not, you don't speak in wonkish terms, and you're not the head of one of these 501c3s like the Cato or the Iron Rain Institute, which do all great work. You're someone who's walked in the shoes. You felt it. And in fact, when you read the dedication to your father, you could feel like this is something really near and dear to you, and you feel for small business. This is not just data on a chart for people to see.
No, it's true. I mean, my blessing and my curse is that I am an empath and a problem solver and a helper, like all in one, which is like a bad combination. So I feel very deeply, and it really weighs on my shoulders. And I think coming from a blue collar family, and my dad grew up in like very much poverty on the west side of Chicago, and changed his lot in life through great choices and hard work, and created an opportunity to the point where like I am successful beyond even my wildest dreams. And it's like I don't feel like it's because I'm special in any way, or like like the chosen one. It's just that's the opportunity that is there if you want to take it, and if people tell you that you can take it. And that's what my dad did. He was always like go get it, go get it. There's there's no limit. It was an abundance mentality, and there's so many people who were like, no, only one person can be successful, and there's only this pie. And so I just take it very personally, and I don't like seeing other people like as I said, I'm not a power and control person. I just I'm really excited about all the things that I've seen. I want to preserve that opportunity for other people. I think it's really cool. And unfortunately, we're the only example of that in the world, and it's under threats. And so if it's not us and we don't preserve that opportunity, where's that opportunity going to exist? And I don't think it's to the betterment of anybody. So so that sort of personal aspect of let's get everybody, in everyone can succeed. It doesn't take away from anyone to have more people participating. It's a good thing, is just sort of my philosophy. And it sounds like that fortunately showed through in the writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I have some questions here about some topics. I plucked out a couple of topics just to give the reader, these future readers of the war on small business, a couple topics to bring up to you. But before I do that, though, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
I think I found an Easter egg in this book.
It may have been completely unintentional.
I think I found one. So for the audience, now Easter egg, that's a young people talk. There's some kind of secret little inference of an inside joke. So for the audience, and for you, Carol, I'm going to do a movie impression. There's a chapter here named after one of your favorite movies. Okay, so the impression is for the audience. You got to guess it. You want me to bring something else? No. Trading Places, chapter 12.
Exactly.
Was that intentionally to name after your favorite Eddie Murphy movie?
I mean, there's definitely a slight nod, and really the whole story of the little guy versus the big guy is the story of Trading Places. So I've written sort of about that Winthrop and Valentine versus the Duke dynamic before. So yeah, it's a little bit of a nod there. So
okay, all right.
You did well in ascertaining that.
Oh well, thank you. Okay, all right. So one of the big things I've listened to one of your other interviews. Could you tell the audience what's so big about this book, The Black Swan? What is The Black Swan?
So The Black Swan, which is a book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who is this very smart former derivatives trader and philosopher, is a book that he wrote that's very wonky. It's very hard to read, but the premise is that we're in this interconnected world, and there are these things that happen that nobody can predict. And it's been sort of co-opted in language to say, it's just kind of an unforeseen event that comes out of nowhere. And so when we talk about what happened in 2020, there are all these people who are like, oh, the pandemic, the black swan of the pandemic. And it's like, no, the pandemic wasn't a black swan at all. I mean, people not only had been talking about this forever, but there was a drill that was done in 2019 called Crimson Contagion that was with the federal government, a number of the agencies, like 12 to 14 states, a bunch of local jurisdictions. And by the way, it's like, if you look into it, it's frightening. It's like the exact scenario. It's like, oh, this like bio agent escapes from like a lab in China and comes here. I mean, it's like literally the same. So they literally practiced for this months before this happened. So there's no black swan there. They weren't prepared, but they practiced, they knew. The black swan was the government reaction. Like, we've never seen a point where they're like, okay, there is, you know, an illness that's out here, and we've had obviously, you know, MERS and H1N1 and all kinds of things where they're like, we're just going to like shut down a large swath of the economy. That, like, nobody predicted that. And I remember like early on going on these TV programs, and I was concerned that we were going to have a black swan. I said that on Cheddar. I mentioned that in the book. This was not and like, again, since they were unknown, I didn't know what it was. But this was not like within the realm that like, oh, if it comes here, it's like so much so that when my husband and I were having this discussion in February, like, we're like, okay, like, so like, if let's say this did come here, like, what could you do? Like, what, like, we just, you know, kind of hypothetically, what would you do? And I said, well, like, imagine trying to lock down to get like just everyone locked down for 2 weeks. I was like, there's no way you could do it. And he agreed, there's no way you could do it. And in a sense, we were right, because they didn't lock down the economy. They just locked down part of the economy. And that, you know, kind of ended up in this whole picking of winners and losers dynamic that we lay out. But that was the black swan. And by the way, the narrative is not that. The narrative is that there was a full lockdown, that we were all in it together, and, you know, so on and so forth, and that this was like some sort of rational decision. And so that's part of what I try to lay the case out in the book, that that's not what happened, so that you can be armed with the knowledge, because they are gaslighting and they are trying to rewrite history. And if people aren't wise to what the reality of it is, it will happen again, and it will be worse the next time, because we just proved how easy it was to control the population of the United States of America.
Yeah, I really, really enjoy that point, because it wasn't the natural phenomena; it was the human not the human interaction. It was the man-made catastrophe which we made out of it. And if I remember right, the definition was something to the effect of, you know, altering customs and patterns. So yeah, I was shocked. And as you wrote about the government's reaction and I guess the mandates to close down for some of the population, and you started talking about the emergency use authorization, just how burdensome, I couldn't believe we're in a catastrophe, speed is of the essence, and they slowed everything down. And the one thing I just want to tell you, I've always studied military strategy, military history. And one thing I've learned over the years is wars are won 20 to 30 years prior to them actually being started. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, holy shit, this is our government. Look at this. Look how they screwed this up. And when you talk about the levels, not to screw up, but here's the thing, it's not like you said, it wasn't an accident. I think Ayn Rand said best, like, you know, errors in this kind of judgment errors of this magnitude are not by accident. And you point out that it wasn't just by accident, that it just so happened that there were certain beneficiaries. Oh my God. Go figure.
Right. It just so happened, if you were connected and had clout, that it was to your benefit, or they found a way to take care of you. And it's interesting that you use that 20 to 30 year time frame, because that's pretty much the time frame that I cover in the book, kind of the last 20-ish, maybe 30 years, to lay out what has happened and how that enabled this war. So like, when you're in the military analogy is right there. So like, you can take that and apply it directly to the thesis in the book.
Oh my gosh. It's it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's not just heartbreaking. I was just infuriated reading it. And if I remember right, I mean, God, you had so many great statistics in here.
Hundreds.
Well, yeah. In fact, over 500 sources.
Which I had to check like 5 times and have like 3 proofreaders check. Yeah.
One of the stats I read was, if I'm right, for the CARES Act, around only 20% went to small businesses, which represent half the economy. Only 20%. Yeah,
I mean, it actually may be less. I have to go back and do the actual calculation. But yeah, just underneath that, which is, and again, this is where the frustration comes, because there was a path, and I don't need to like, I'm a liberties person, but like if you were a lockdown person, as I've said, there were no lockdowns, so we can't argue that was a thing. So this middle of the road path, the partial lockdown, the picking of winners and losers, like you can make a justification if you compensate those folks under eminent domain. We're taking your property for the public good, we'll compensate you. You can make that argument, and I lay out the case in the book. They could have spent $1 trillion to like $1.5 trillion, which would have been a fraction of the more than $6 trillion that they spent. And it would have preserved employment. It would have preserved small business. It would have bought them at least 2 to 3 months to figure out mitigation strategies. And it really would have shifted the entire dynamic of what happened last year, and then also what we're dealing with in the supply chain today and in the labor market today, that is the outgrowth of the consequences of these actions. And so they chose not to do that. They treated it like they treat everything else, and it was cash for cronies, trademark, and folks that have other access to capital, who didn't need capital, that were not vulnerable, got all kinds of money, and it was just a mess. And so that's the part that I take issue with, that like, if you're going to say, okay, we need to do something, okay, well, here's a way that you could have done that to achieve the objective, but that wasn't done. And we weren't all locked down, so we weren't all feeling the pain and having, like, if you would have had the stock market not propped up, Amazon's warehouse closed, Walmart, Target, like 2 to 3 weeks, everyone would have been screaming. We would have been out of lockdowns. End of story. So we didn't have it all together. We didn't have the compensation. We didn't have full liberty. We didn't. We just had government whim picking winners and losers, which is the worst of all worlds, for our economic freedom, for individual rights, like for the future of wealth creation opportunities in this country. And that's the through line, is that even if it didn't affect you this time, if you got the golden ticket this time, that doesn't mean you're going to get the golden ticket the next time.
I mean, what maniac out there wants AOC investing with their money? Seriously, maniacs, crazies. It's because we're like when the government picks winners and losers, we pay for it. They pay nothing. So
right, people forget, like, they don't have any money. They don't create anything of value. So it's either money that they have directly taken from you, or that they have printed out of thin air to devalue what you do already have, and or create a liability for you in the future. So it's really all, in some way, shape, or form, it's all yours.
Value of this book is, it not only does it take you through the timeline of the government response, but it goes into the element. You talk about the Fed, which is just that's in itself is a fascinating topic. Quantitative easing, inflation, what it does to your dollar, what does the value of your dollar. So again, I can't recommend this highly enough. It's an extraordinarily important book. For the audience here, just how bad was the government response to COVID? I got some notes here. Now, compare these economic numbers to the Great Recession of 2008. The Great Recession, we saw an 8.4% decline in GDP compared to 32.9% decline. That was recorded in July 2020. And the economy shrank 10% from April to June in 2020, which I understand the largest quarterly decline on record. Unnecessary. It's just, oh my gosh. I had no clue just how bad it was, Carol. And you lay out this case. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate it and appreciate your feedback. And yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pointed out the things about China and the Fed, because I think that's the important thing too, is that this is not just, let me tell you all the stories about the small business. We talk about the response, we talk about the individual liberties, and we kind of get into these topics that a lot of people kind of know aren't quite right in this country, but don't really understand. And so I want to educate people in easy language so that you can go out and explain to other people why this is bad and this becomes a movement, because this isn't about me. Like I keep saying, I want people to talk about the war on small business and not attribute it to me. I want you to talk about it as a concept and go, I don't remember where I heard about it, but like, this is what's going on in terms of the attack of decentralization and free markets and the consolidation of power as a war on small business, blah, blah, blah. Because this isn't about me. This is about economic freedom in our country.
Yeah, you're the messenger. I get it. I totally get it. You got time for another question?
I do.
Okay. So what, besides you interconnecting all the elements of, connecting capitalism, economics with individual liberty, one of the things I found really fascinating about your writing, again, you talk a lot about cascading effects. Sometimes in the Army call them second to third order of effects. And, when people realize that when these small businesses close down, or even when you send money to some of these institutions that don't need it, there are vendors, suppliers for some of these universities. They're towns, which they lose small businesses. And one of the things that I never realized, you connected really some of the riots that we had, some of the upheavals that we had due to, for whatever reason, we saw riots, was in Michigan, or we saw riots many places, but just the destruction on the small businesses. I mean, it's almost like these small businesses were getting beat up in every single direction.
They were. And again, it goes back to the individual rights. And this is, the part that was, again, so frustrating, because we can't have a logical conversation, a nuanced conversation in this country. But the George Floyd protests and the Breonna Taylor protests and all of these protests were protests against the government infringing on individual rights. It's the same, we're fighting the same fight. And so to then say, well, they infringed on my rights, so now I'm going to go infringe on somebody else's rights and burn their down. It's like, but you're just taking away the point you're making. Like, we should all be standing together and making the same point. And that was like part of the tragedy that was lost in the discussion. And as I, relayed through some of the stories in the book, the most impacted communities from not only the COVID mandates, but then the double whammy of having this social justice fallout, which was, again, a protest against government infringement on rights, were these small, vulnerable communities and minority business owners. So people who, were feeling the issues and want to fight the issues were then personally experiencing additional loss. And I think there's such, again, a high level misunderstanding of not only property rights, but of business and private enterprise and, kind of the whole dynamic of, who's big and who's small and how that impacts the economy. So you say, well, it's okay, they've got insurance, they'll recover. And it's like, no, like, it morally is wrong. But a lot of these don't, or doesn't cover what you've done, or you've now like burned down their soul. Like, I don't think people could understand that it's, it's certainly different, but it's a really bad thing. And we should be looking at that in the same bad light. And then I cited those statistics, which I was thrilled I was able to find about, cities recovering from episodes like riots, and how much faster they bounce back after like something like a hurricane versus something like a riot, because of the mental sort of defeatedness, if that's a word, mental defeats that you feel when somebody goes in and takes something from you versus just an act of nature that takes it from you. So it's just a very different reaction. And so, I was glad to be able to find some supporting statistics to kind of show the scope. And we're still seeing it. The minority business owners and the vulnerable communities are still the ones that are hurt the most and having the hardest time paying their rents, and are in having vulnerabilities around staying open. So that's like not a good outcome if we're trying to achieve more equality and more opportunities for wealth creation for everybody in this country.
Oh, and the example, I forgot his name. I'm sorry. The poor fireman. Oh my God.
Bala. Oh my God. I mean, the irony there was not lost on me.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Just to tell the story, since you brought it up really quickly, is this fireman who retires. He spends his whole life fighting fires. He spends his life savings and all this time, and he's about to open up his dream sort of restaurant and bar called Scores in Minneapolis, and he is pushed back on his opening because of these COVID mandates. And like, okay, I'm gonna try and hang in there. I'm gonna get to open, and his place was burnt to the ground in the protest that happened around Lake Avenue during the George Floyd protests. And he was on the news in tears that they even if they could replace, which fortunately he got a GoFundMe and he was able to replace the Capitol, but the time that he lost, the time away from his family, the blood, sweat, and tears it took to build this thing up and be ready to present to the world and have it taken away. And so this is this family of color that was like, yes, justice, but this isn't justice. Like this is a bad outcome. And so it's important to tell those stories and for people to understand the appreciation of why we need to really look at things based on principles and based on our individual rights.
What's funny, you mentioned principles and individual rights, and you talk about the attack on capitalism. I guess this is the way that we allow politicians to have control over us. And you made a remark, which I've read a lot of books on capitalism. I'm a huge fan of capitalism. That's why I'm so happy you connected the two. But you made an observation I've never seen made before, and I loved it. And that was when people attack greed. And everyone's talking about companies for being greedy. And you say, well, what about the consumer? And I was like, oh yes. I want this cake for cheaper than it is. I want to take this Uber ride cheaper. I loved it because you're showing that that's a natural element of human nature. And it's not just companies, it's everybody. So you want something cheaper than I make it. That's being greedy. And I just never seen that. So kudos to you. That was awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I like to give people, again, because these are very heady concepts and everyone who talks about them is like so wonky about stuff. But like, really, this all just boils down to human nature and how do we address human nature. And so greed is the one I always find super funny because nobody thinks that they're greedy, right? Everybody thinks everyone else is being greedy. We're all greedy. It's human nature. And so to give you kind of the language to think about that and to support it. But the most important takeaway there is that if you believe people are fundamentally greedy, which by the way, they are, which is fine. It's part of human nature. Capitalism is the only, and I call it an unsystem because again, it's just free choice. It's not design. There is no system. It's just an unsystem, but it's the only unsystem that really harnesses and leverages that greed. They're the checks and balances that are inherent in it, that if people are greedy, there is a stopping point. And I'll lay out the kids in the book so you can read it. But the central planners, the socialists, the democratic socialists, like they just pretend greed doesn't exist. And their whole argument is, oh no, we're going to find Mother Teresa to come in and run things and then it's better and everybody's going to be taken care of. And like we have all of time in history to prove that that's just not the case. There's no example of that where that's the case. So we know people are greedy. We know people are going to take care of their friends and their cronies and families and want to secure power and things like that. So if you believe in that, you should believe in capitalism because that's what creates the best outcomes. We have all the data in the world to support that through all of time. And we know that these other things are like fantasy land. And so, that's the important sort of point around explaining concepts that people always talk about like greed, because yeah, it's true. We're all greedy. It's okay. We just need to know how is it that we are going to operate knowing that, human nature is a reality and we are not these like highly evolved beings that people like to pretend that we are.
So I have a segue into the final question. And by the way, Carol, when I say the word segue, I always think of you because I was following years ago when I was on Twitter. I was following you, and there was some guy who was really snarky with you. And he said, and for some reason he threw segue into the tweet, but he spelled it SEGWAY. And you wrote, segue is spelled SEGUE, not SEGWAY. And you had a gif of some like dork on a Segway. You like know the difference. So every time I think of segue, I'm like, don't be that guy.
That's amazing. I don't even remember saying that, but that's so something I would say. So I completely believe that I did, and I'm going to have to go through my tweets to find that.
It's burned in my head. Do not be that guy.
Yeah, it's hard. I lit up a number of randos in my day, so it's hard to remember all of my comebacks. I tend to focus on the Muskets one, but
Piers Morgan. For the audience, look up Carol Roth, Piers Morgan. You don't see someone get burned. Oh, it's beautiful. It's a work of art.
I literally have, I would say, a good 15 to 20% of my following that's specifically attributable to that moment in time. The amount of people, and it's weird because it still goes viral. It went viral a couple weeks ago again and had like another whole renaissance of people finding it. And it's like 8.5 years later and people are still remembering it. So that's kind of hilarious.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So the last thing I want to bring up is, again, in this book, near the end, you circle back to China. And I didn't know a lot about China, especially was it 79 or 80? We really started propping them up or helping them turn, you say, capitalist. And 2 guests prior to you, I had a guy on named Michael Scheuer, who was the head of the CIA's Bin Laden unit. He was a guy who was tracking down, trying to kill Bin Laden, and he was always highly critical of the American efforts of fighting terrorism. It's like, you don't fight terrorism, you fight insurgencies. They're an army, you fight it differently. But he made a remark one time that it came to me reading this, and he said that for some reason, American decision makers, especially political decision makers, have become, in a sense, Marxist. They've become Marxist in the belief that democracy and capitalism will always win. It'll always come out in the end. And reading this history about how the Americans were really propping up the Chinese to become capitalists, forgetting that their core essence was not. It ignored property rights, it ignored individual rights. Could you talk about that briefly? Because that is just utterly fascinating, the lack of decision making.
Yeah, thank you. So it's one of my 2 favorite chapters in the book, the Fed chapter and the China chapter. And by the way, it's when I get feedback, it seems to be everybody else's favorite chapters as well. Because it's so stark when you really kind of look at the whole scenario and realize that we exported capitalism to them to their great benefit at the same time that we started importing, if you will, central planning to our detriment. And yes, we also imported cheap goods, which were deflationary, but the consequence of that was that we had less innovation, fewer opportunities for small business, wage suppression, and obviously a huge infringement on global intellectual property rights. And I try to relate this core thesis back to the tenets of capitalism, why it's so important. But you have to remember, and this comes up over and over, and I've got some stuff this week on my Twitter feed about China and what's going on there, is at their core, they are communists. They don't believe in individual rights or property rights. We've seen the human rights violations against the Uyghurs and a whole bunch of other people. We've seen what happened to Jack Ma when he got too big and, was pulled into obscurity or whatnot. So if you don't have a sort of central principle that believes in individual or property rights, you end up with China, where people can't take the risk to innovate because it's too risky. You're not going to own what it is that you're innovating. So they are replicators. and that is their entire culture. And that's why they not only steal intellectual property, but like they don't see that there's a problem with stealing intellectual property because they don't believe in property. I mean, that's just the system that they're in. And so I think it's a really good, like it's meant as a mirror reflection for us to look at not only what central planners did in terms of making the wrong decisions. We're going to have a trading partner who doesn't believe in the same rules of the game. Like you can't play football if the two teams are playing with two different sets of rules to the game, right? There needs to be the standard guardrails of property rights and transparency. And so that was a complete miscalculation on their standpoint, and they are to blame for the huge growth in China in a bad way. It's not that I don't want to see the Chinese people prosper. It's not that I don't want to see Chinese people lifted out of extreme poverty. Obviously we do, but we want to see that in that fair playing field that benefits everyone. I mean, why is it that they can steal our intellectual property? Why is it that if we want to do investments in their country, that we need a business partner, yet they can do whatever they can to us? And I warn, these kind of young Marxists, each of the rich people, China is printing billionaires at a faster rate than the US right now. So if you think billionaires should be illegal in the US, what about all those billionaires in China that are then going to control all the money and power? And so it's that kind of like, if you, again, don't have the economic background, you can't think like 5 steps ahead in how all of this is interconnected, is where you get these like short-term things like, oh yes, we should definitely open up trade with China and walk them into the World Trade Organization, which again ended up screwing the American people over to the benefit of the Chinese. And so that's really kind of the part of the larger takeaway. But there's obviously a lot of deep information that lays that out within that chapter, which I think people, not only do I think people will learn a lot, I know because my husband decided to tell me about something that he learned from that chapter, but he didn't remember where he'd heard it from. So he's like, oh, I heard this really interesting thing I wanted to tell you, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, that's from my book. He's like, oh, yeah. Oh so I know people are absorbing it. They may not remember where it came from, but like I know that it's fascinating. So it was fascinating to me as I knew a lot of the things individually, but this was the first time I really had pieced it together in that way. And it has my feelings about free trade have shifted over time as you realize that they're not playing by the same set of rules and the challenges that creates. So like as a free marketeer, I know a lot of free marketeers like global trade is good, and we should have, and yes, if everyone has the same playing field, but if they don't, then it's no longer free trade anymore. And so we need to look at it through that lens. So I think that's like one area where I have evolved in terms of my own views on things, and you can see the current level of that thinking within that chapter.
This is just for the audience again, the war on small business, how the government used the pandemic to crush the backbone of America. Again, this is just, it's a fantastic read. By the way, it's a beautiful book too. I usually don't judge books by their covers, but damn, this is just the coloring, everything, a really, really beautiful book, great book.
Want to hear a funny story about that real quickly?
Yes.
So this is the compromise cover, because they kept coming up with these very cutesy covers. And I kept going, it's a war. And so I would send back a mock-up, and I actually put the mock-up on Twitter. You can find it in my media, of this, basically something that kind of looks like this book cover, but they had covered in bullet holes, like pictures of bullet holes. I was like, this is serious. Like we need to have so they're like, no, we're not doing that. So this was the compromise. It was like, well, I'm not going with your like cutesy stuff, and you're not going with my like war and like maiming stuff. So we'll just use it like this.
It's great. It really is. When it came in, I'm like, wow, I just wanted to touch it. It's beautiful book. It's a great book. And just real quickly, how long did it take you to write this?
I mean, I wrote this, it took a year. I wrote it over the course basically of just about a year. And as I mentioned, it was 3.5 books. So there were two previous titles, The Looting of America, which I still kind of like, and Too Big to Succeed. And then we ended up with the War on Small Business. They all were slightly different in focus, but also with a lot of the same things. So that's, as this unfolded real time, I mean, I've been deep into this stuff for a long time, which again, I wrote my last book in 6 weeks. So it was a very different experience. It took up a lot of my time, but I'm very proud of the output. And I just hope people will read it. I think if everyone can take the charge of read it, and I'm going to tell 10 people to buy it, and we're going to talk about it, and then I'll take the charge that each of those people are going to tell, like that's how this idea is going to spread. And that's how this knowledge is going to spread. And that's how things are going to change. It's not going to change by just me writing the book and going on some podcasts and some TV shows. So I did my part. I leave it in all of your hands, and you can decide whether you care about economic freedom or not. Not to guilt you into it, but that's really where we're at.
I love it. I love it, Carol. This is just, again, for the audience, the War on Small Business. They can find you on Amazon. This is where you can order it.
So, well, let me just jump in there. Is that it's the War on Small Business. So yes, you can choose to go to Amazon, but you can also choose to go to a local small business bookseller. You can go to bookshop.org online. That it's currently back ordered because we sent so much business to them. But there's a whole list depending on where you are at HarperCollins. The publisher has a whole list of different retailers. And as I said, I'm a capitalist. So if you find value in Amazon, you can order there, but you might want to consider not ordering there and putting your money where your mouth is and supporting small business booksellers as well, because that's part of the reason we're in the situation that we're in. So just an idea.
It's a great idea. And we can also find you on iTunes. Is that correct? For the
Roth Effect is like wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. But really, I mean, if you, like you said earlier, like if you want to find me and all my glory, Twitter at Carol J.S. Roth is the place.
And I highly recommend it, Carol. Oh, it's great. It's great.
And apparently there's a thing about a segue that's super funny that I need to go find.
Oh, that was great. Well, Carol Roth, again, thank you for your time. This has been great. And congratulations, because this is not a good book. It's an important book. It's a very important book. And thank you for doing it. I think small business men and women around the country need to read this, and really thank you for putting it in front of us, because I had no clue to the effects, and you bring it out in a clear, succinct, and a very entertaining way. So it's really great work.
I much appreciate it. And I have to ask you, I saw the picture of Jackson, your dog, with the book. Did he also enjoy the read?
Oh, I read to Jackson every night. So
he's on board. I have his full endorsement.
He's absolutely on board. He loves, small business bones.
Because you're great, but really all we care about is the dog, Kevin.
Exactly. Jackson approves. Well, thank you, Carol Roth. And again, audience, The War on Small Business, How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America by Carol Roth. Check out Carol on the Roth Effect, and make sure to go to Twitter and follow her. With that, have a great day, everyone. If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile. You know what's funny? You mentioned principles and individual rights, and you talk about the attack on capitalism. I guess this is the way that we allow politicians to have control over us. And you made a remark, which I've read a lot of books on capitalism. I'm a huge fan of capitalism. That's why I'm so happy you connected the two. But you made an observation I've never seen made before, and I loved it. And that was when people attack greed. And, everyone's talking about companies for being greedy. And you say, well, what about the consumer? And I was like, oh, yes. I want this cake for cheaper than it is. I want to take this Uber ride cheaper. I loved it because you're showing that's a natural element of human nature. And it's not just companies, it's everybody. So you want something cheaper than I make it. That's being greedy. And I just never seen that. So kudos to you. That was awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I like to give people again, because these are very heady concepts and everyone who talks about them is like so wonky about stuff, but like really this all just boils down to human nature and how do we address human nature. And so greed is the one I always find super funny because nobody thinks that they're greedy, right? Everybody thinks everyone else is being greedy. We're all greedy. It's human nature. And so to give you kind of the language to think about that and to support it. But the most important takeaway there is that if you believe people are fundamentally greedy, which by the way, they are, which is fine. It's part of human nature. Capitalism is the only, and I call it an unsystem because again, it's just free choice. It's not design. There is no system. It's just an unsystem, but it's the only unsystem that really harnesses and leverages that greed. They're the checks and balances that are inherent in it, that if people are greedy, there is a stopping point. And I'll lay out the kids in the book so you can read it. But the central planners, the socialists, the democratic socialists, like they just pretend greed doesn't exist. And their whole argument is, oh no, we're going to find Mother Teresa to come in and run things and then it's better and everybody's going to be taken care of. And like we have all of time in history to prove that that's just not the case. There's no example of that where that's the case. So we know people are greedy. We know people are going to take care of their friends and their cronies and families and want to secure power and things like that. So if you believe in that, you should believe in capitalism because that's what creates the best outcomes. We have all the data in the world to support that through all of time. And we know that these other things are like fantasy land. And so, that's the important sort of point around explaining concepts that people always talk about, like greed, because yeah, it's true, we're all greedy. It's okay. We just need to know how is it that we are going to operate, knowing that human nature is a reality and we are not these like highly evolved beings that people like to pretend that we are.
If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast and you can even create a free members profile. Besides you interconnecting all the elements of, connecting capitalism, economics with individual liberty. One of the things I found really fascinating about your writing, again, you talk a lot about cascading effects. Sometimes in the Army call them second to third order of effects. And, when people realize that when these small businesses close down, or even when you send money to some of these institutions that don't need it, there are vendors, suppliers. For some of these universities, they're towns, which they lose small businesses. And one of the things that I never realized, you connected really some of the riots that we had, some of the upheavals that we had due to, for whatever reason, we saw riots, was in Michigan or we saw riots many places, but just the destruction on the small businesses. I mean, it's almost like these small businesses were getting beat up in every single direction.
They were. And again, it goes back to the individual rights. And this is, the part that was, again, so frustrating because we can't have a logical conversation, a nuanced conversation in this country. But the George Floyd protests and the Breonna Taylor protests and all of these protests were protests against the government infringing on individual rights. It's the same, we're fighting the same fights. And so to then say, well, they infringed on my rights, so now I'm going to go infringe on somebody else's rights and burn their down. It's like, but you're just taking away the point you're making. Like we should all be standing together and making the same point. And that was like part of the tragedy that was lost in the discussion. And as I, relayed through some of the stories in the book, the most impacted communities from not only the COVID mandates, but then the double whammy of having this social justice fallout, which was, again, a protest against government infringement on rights, were these small, vulnerable communities and minority business owners. So people who, were feeling the issues and want to fight the issues were then personally experiencing additional loss. And I think there's such, again, a high level misunderstanding of not only property rights, but of business and private enterprise, and, kind of the whole dynamic of, who's big and who's small, and how that impacts the economy. So you say, well, it's okay, they've got insurance, they'll recover. And it's like, no, like, it morally is wrong, but a lot of these don't, or doesn't cover what you've done, or you've now like burned down their soul. Like, I don't think people could understand that it's, it's certainly different, but it's a really bad thing, and we should be looking at that in the same bad light. And then I cited those statistics, which I was thrilled I was able to find, about cities recovering from episodes like riots, and how much faster they bounce back after like something like a hurricane versus something like a riot, because of the mental sort of defeatedness, if that's a word, mental defeats that you feel when somebody goes in and takes something from you versus just an act of nature that takes it from you. So it's just a very different reaction. And so, I was glad to be able to find some supporting statistics to kind of show the scope. And we're still seeing it. The minority business owners and the vulnerable communities are still the ones that are hurt the most and having the hardest time paying their rents, and are in having vulnerabilities around staying open. So that's like not a good outcome if we're trying to achieve more equality and more opportunities for wealth creation for everybody in this country.
Oh, and the example, I forgot his name. I'm sorry. The poor fireman. Oh my God.
Bala. Oh my God. I mean, the irony there was not lost on me.
Wow.
Yeah. Just to tell the story, since you brought it up really quickly, is this fireman who retires. He spent his whole life fighting fires. He spends his life savings and all this time, and he's about to open up his dream sort of restaurant and bar called Scores in Minneapolis, and he is pushed back on his opening because of these COVID mandates. And like, okay, I'm gonna try and hang in there. I'm gonna get to open, and his place was burnt to the ground in the protests that happened around Lake Avenue during the George Floyd protests. And he was on the news in tears that like they like, even if they could replace, which fortunately he got a GoFundMe and he was able to replace the Capitol, but the time that he lost, the time away from his family, the blood, sweat, and tears it took to build this thing up and be ready to present it to the world and have it taken away. And so this is this family of color that was like, yes, justice, but this isn't justice. Like this is a bad outcome. And so it's important to tell those stories and for people to understand the appreciation of why we need to really look at things based on principles and based on our individual rights.
If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile